The Jacob K. Javits Convention Center had been transformed into something resembling a cathedral of modern womanhood. Soft pink lighting bathed the main stage, where three sleek chairs sat arranged in a perfect crescent. Behind them, a massive digital banner read Women's Empowerment Global Summit 2025 in gleaming gold letters that caught every camera flash from the packed audience. Oprah Winfrey walked onto the stage with the kind of presence that made even seasoned celebrities sit up straighter. Her emerald green suit commanded attention as she smiled warmly at the live audience of nearly 2,000 people. Influencers with ring lights, journalists with notepads, and activists with anticipation filled every seat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Good morning, beautiful souls. Oprah's voice carried that familiar warmth that had made her a household name for decades. Today, we celebrate the voices that refuse to be silenced, the stories that demand to be told, and the women who've transformed pain into power. The applause was thunderous. In the third row, Nina Ortega adjusted her small documentary camera, her heart racing. This was her shot. Her breakout piece on modern feminism needed this kind of star power, and today delivered two of the most talked about women on the planet. Please join me in welcoming two extraordinary women, a woman who turned heartbreak into harmony and reclaimed her narrative one song at a time, Taylor Swift. Taylor emerged from stage left, her cream-colored blazer and matching wide-leg trousers giving her an air of understated elegance. She waved to the crowd with genuine warmth, her smile reaching her eyes as she settled into the chair closest to Oprah. And a woman who chose love over protocol, authenticity over approval, Meghan Markle. Meghan appeared from stage right in a tailored white outfit that seemed to glow under the lights. Her smile was perfect, practiced, but Nina noticed the way her fingers briefly adjusted her cue cards before she sat down. The applause was equally enthusiastic, although Nina caught a few scattered whispers in the rows behind her. The two women exchanged polite nods across the small space between their chairs. Taylor's expression was open, friendly. Meghan's smile was professional, guarded. Backstage, Zara Khanna watched the monitors with the cynical eye of someone who'd managed too many celebrity brands. She sipped her third espresso of the morning and muttered to her assistant, "Two alpha women, one stage. This should be interesting." 20 minutes in, the conversation had found its rhythm. Oprah guided them through the expected topics: leadership challenges, personal growth, and the importance of female solidarity. Taylor spoke about reclaiming her masters, her voice steady and measured. Meghan discussed mental health advocacy, her hands moving gracefully as she emphasized key points. But Nina, trained to notice the spaces between words, caught the subtle shift when Oprah asked about media narratives. "Both of you have faced intense scrutiny," Oprah said, her tone gentle but probing. "How do you stay authentic when the world is watching?" Taylor answered first, her response flowing like lyrics. "I think authenticity means owning your story, even the messy parts, especially the messy parts. When you're vulnerable, you give other people permission to be human, too." Meghan nodded slowly, but her smile had an edge. "Absolutely. Though I think it's interesting how some people's vulnerability gets celebrated, while others get criticized for sharing the same struggles." She paused, letting the words settle. "I mean, some celebrity feminists have mastered the art of making hardship look like a brand opportunity. Pain becomes profitable when you have the right team packaging it." A ripple of uncomfortable energy moved through the audience. Taylor raised her eyebrow almost imperceptibly, but her expression remained pleasant, neutral. Backstage, Zara nearly choked on her espresso. "Oh, she went there," she whispered to her phone as she started typing furiously. This was exactly the kind of moment that broke the internet. Oprah, sensing danger with the instincts of someone who'd navigated decades of live television, smoothly redirected. "Both of your journeys have inspired millions of women. What advice would you give to someone just finding their voice? But Nina could see it now, the hairline fracture that would soon become a canyon. In her notebook, she wrote, "First shot fired." Taylor went first, her voice carrying the cadence of someone who'd learned to choose words carefully. For me, it's about connection. Music is this universal language that can make someone feel less alone in their pain. When I write about heartbreak or betrayal or finding strength, I'm not performing those feelings, I'm sharing them. There's a difference between being seen and helping others feel seen. The audience murmured appreciatively. Several people nodded along, phones recording every word. Meghan's response came with a sharper edge. "That's beautiful, Taylor, really. Though I do think some of us don't have the luxury of turning our pain into poetry that sells millions of copies and gets us praised for bravery." Her smile never wavered, but her voice carried steel. Some of us live our struggles without a team of songwriters helping us find the right metaphor. The sharp intake of breath from the audience was audible. Nina's pen froze mid-sentence as she stared at the stage. This was no longer subtext. This was direct fire. Taylor's composure remained intact, but her fingers began that rhythmic tapping again. Not nervous energy, but something more calculated, like a metronome keeping time before a song begins. "I think," Taylor said, her voice softer now but somehow more commanding, "we all process pain differently. Some of us tell stories to help others feel less alone. Others tell theirs to make sure we're not forgotten in the noise." The audience was completely still. Even Oprah leaned forward slightly, her seasoned instincts telling her this was veering into territory that couldn't be easily smoothed over. Backstage, Zara was frantically typing on her phone. Feminist Fight Club Summit Edition, followed by fire emojis. This wasn't just going viral, this was going nuclear. Nina caught herself holding her breath. In her viewfinder, she could see both women clearly. Meghan's mask of politeness starting to crack at the edges, Taylor's stillness becoming more intentional, more dangerous. The next words spoken would determine whether this remained a professional disagreement or became something much bigger. The world was watching, waiting, and neither woman looked ready to back down. Oprah, with the grace of someone who'd weathered every kind of television storm, attempted to steer them back to safer waters. "Taylor, your music has become a soundtrack for empowerment. How do you see the role of art in activism?" For a moment, the question hung in the air like an olive branch. Taylor could have taken it, could have deflected back to safer ground. Instead, she turned slightly in her chair, angling her body toward Meghan with deliberate intention. "You know, Oprah," Taylor said, her voice carrying that deceptive softness that made her most devastating lyrics feel like lullabies, "I've learned something important over the years. There's a difference between vulnerability and victimhood. One builds bridges, one burns them." The silence that followed was deafening. Nina watched through her camera lens as Meghan's carefully constructed smile finally faltered, her eyes widening just a fraction. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Vulnerability," Taylor continued, her tone conversational, as if she were discussing the weather, "means sharing your truth to help others find theirs. It means taking responsibility for your part in the story, even the uncomfortable parts. It means growth." She paused, letting the words land with surgical precision. Sometimes people confuse the two. They think being vulnerable means never being wrong, never being questioned. But real strength isn't about being the victim of every story you tell. It's about choosing what story you want to write next. The applause started slowly. One person, then several, then thunderous. But Nina noticed it wasn't universal. The room had divided itself without anyone announcing sides. Oprah's voice carried a warning edge when she spoke. "Ladies, let's remember we're here to lift each other up." But Meghan's composure was cracking visibly now. Her hands clenched slightly in her lap, her professional mask slipping to reveal something raw underneath. Backstage, Zara was whispering to her assistant, "Taylor just served ice with a smile. Meghan's about to lose it." The calm before the storm had ended. The real battle was about to begin. Meghan's restraint finally snapped like an overtuned guitar string. "That's rich," she said, using a voice that rose just enough to cut through Taylor's careful composure. "That's really rich, coming from someone who's built an entire career on playing the victim." Her professional smile had vanished completely, replaced by something sharp and desperate. The audience gasped, an audible wave of shock that Nina felt in her chest. This was no longer subtext, this was war. "You want to talk about vulnerability?" Meghan continued, leaning forward in her chair. "Try living your pain without a PR team spinning it into Grammy nominations. Try facing criticism without an army of devoted fans defending your every move." Her voice grew stronger, more cutting. "You've made pain a product, Taylor. You've turned heartbreak into a marketing strategy. At least I lived mine without a focus group." The words hit like physical blows. Several audience members covered their mouths. Nina's camera shook slightly in her hands as she tried to capture both women's reactions. Taylor remained perfectly still, but something had shifted behind her eyes. The careful composure was still there, but underneath it, Nina could see steel being forged. Oprah tried to intervene. "Meghan!" "No," Meghan cut her off, her years of royal training warring with her raw emotion. "I'm tired of pretending. Tired of watching people get celebrated for the same struggles I get crucified for. She gets to write songs about her pain and win awards. I try to speak my truth and get called calculating, ungrateful, attention-seeking." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the wound beneath the anger. The audience was dead silent now, caught between sympathy and second-hand embarrassment. Backstage, Zara was typing frantically. Meghan Markle loses it on live TV. Taylor Swift, silent but deadly. Nina zoomed in on Taylor's face. The pop star hadn't moved, hadn't changed expression, but in that stillness, Nina recognized something she'd seen in her own reflection. The moment when someone realizes they hold all the power and they're deciding exactly how to use it. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. And then, Taylor smiled. When Taylor finally spoke, her voice was quiet enough that the entire auditorium had to strain to hear her. It was a masterclass in commanding attention without demanding it. "Some of us," she said, her words measured like heartbeats, "tell our stories to help other people feel less alone in their pain." She paused, her eyes meeting Meghan's directly for the first time since the panel began. "Others tell theirs just to be seen." The silence that followed was absolute. Nina felt like she was witnessing a kind of violence, not physical, but something that cut deeper. Through her camera lens, she watched Meghan's face cycle through shock, hurt, and something that looked almost like recognition. The audience erupted, not just applause, but something closer to a roar, the sound of people witnessing something they knew would be replayed and analyzed for years. Some stood, others remained seated, stunned. The divide in the room was no longer subtle. Taylor hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't gestured dramatically or lost her composure. She had simply stated a fact so precisely that it landed like truth, undeniable and sharp. Meghan stared at her, breathing visibly, her chest rising and falling with the effort of maintaining any semblance of control. Her mouth opened as if to respond, then closed again. "Perhaps," Oprah said, her voice cutting through the chaos with professional authority, "we should take a brief break." But neither woman moved. They sat there, locked in a moment that felt suspended outside of time, while cameras captured every micro-expression and the audience buzzed with electric energy. Nina wiped tears from her eyes she hadn't realized had fallen. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two women's pain colliding in real time with the world watching. Backstage, Zara had stopped typing. She just stared at the monitors, whispering, "Jesus." She didn't even raise her voice. The precision of Taylor's strike had been devastating precisely because it was delivered without malice, without anger, just the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly where to aim. Meghan's composure didn't just crack, it shattered completely. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the stage floor with a sound that cut through the murmur of the audience like a knife. "You know what?" Her voice carried across the auditorium, no longer modulated or media-trained. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the problem right here." She turned to face the audience, her arms gesturing with raw emotion. "We're sitting here talking about female empowerment while another privileged white woman weaponizes her pain and gets applauded for it.
while I, a biracial woman who gave up everything to speak my truth, get labeled as difficult, calculating, ungrateful, attention-seeking. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the wound beneath the anger. The audience was frozen now. Some phones were raised, recording everything. Others sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to intervene or document. "You want to talk about victimhood?" Meghan's voice cracked with years of suppressed frustration. "Try being told you're not royal enough, not British enough, not grateful enough. Try having your every word dissected while someone else gets praised for writing songs about the same struggles I'm living." Taylor remained seated, her face pale but her posture unchanged. Nina zoomed in on her expression. She looked genuinely shaken for the first time, but still hadn't moved.
Oprah stood slowly, her voice carrying the authority of decades of handling crisis television. "Meghan, I understand you're passionate, but this isn't empowerment anymore. This is escalation." "Maybe it needs to escalate," Meghan shot back. "Maybe we need to stop pretending that empowerment is just pretty women in pretty clothes saying pretty things about overcoming pretty struggles." Backstage, Zara had stopped tweeting entirely. She just stared at the monitors, watching a public relations disaster unfold in real time. "She's spiraling," she whispered to her assistant. "This is career suicide on live television." The storm had broken, and everyone in that room knew they were witnessing something that would define both women's legacies forever. The silence that followed Meghan's outburst stretched until it became unbearable. She stood there, breathing heavily, as if surprised by her own words. The audience waited, cameras rolling, the world watching. Then, without another word, Meghan gathered her cue cards with shaking hands. "I'm done with this hypocrisy," she said, her voice now quiet but audible in the pin-drop silence. "I'm done pretending we're all sisters when some of us are more equal than others." She walked towards stage left, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. At the edge of the stage, she paused and looked back at Taylor, who still hadn't moved from her chair. "Good luck with your next album about overcoming adversity," Meghan said, and then she was gone. The silence that remained was deafening. 2,000 people sat frozen, unsure how to react. The cameras continued rolling, capturing empty space where Meghan had been standing. Oprah moved closer to Taylor, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Taylor looked up at her, then out at the audience. When she spoke, her voice was steady but softer than before. "I think," she said, standing slowly, "we just saw what happens when pain becomes performance instead of purpose." She faced the audience directly. "Empowerment isn't about who hurts the loudest or who suffers the most publicly. It's about what you do with that pain. Do you use it to build something, or do you use it to tear something down?" The applause started tentatively, then built. But it wasn't triumphant. It felt more like relief, like the audience needed somewhere to put their nervous energy. Nina lowered her camera, tears streaming down her face. In her notebook, she wrote, "Maybe power is knowing when to stop speaking." Backstage, Zara was already fielding calls from news outlets. The hashtags were trending, hashtag feminist clash, hashtag empowerment summit, and hashtag Meghan versus Taylor. But for once, she wasn't thinking about the metrics. She was thinking about two women whose pain had just collided in front of the world. The auditorium emptied slowly, people lingering as if reluctant to leave the scene of something historic. Nina packed her camera with unsteady hands, her mind already racing with how to structure what she'd just witnessed for her documentary. Outside, the media frenzy had already begun. News vans lined the street, reporters spoke rapidly into cameras, and social media exploded with takes ranging from savage to sympathetic. The internet had chosen sides within minutes, turning a moment of raw human emotion into content to be consumed and discarded. Oprah stood at the podium for an impromptu press conference, her voice carrying the weight of someone trying to salvage meaning from chaos. She said, Both women deserve grace in this moment. Pain makes us do things we might not do otherwise. What we witnessed today was two people struggling with the cost of being visible. But her words were already being drowned out by the noise machine of modern media. In a quiet hotel room across town, Nina sat with her laptop, reviewing footage. The more she watched, the more she realized this wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about two women trapped in different versions of the same cage, public scrutiny, and lashing out in the only directions they could. She began typing, "Icons or infants? What we saw on that stage today. We came expecting inspiration and left with devastation. But maybe that's what we needed to see. Maybe we needed to witness the moment when empowerment becomes performance, when activism becomes armor, when pain becomes weaponized." Meanwhile, Taylor had slipped out the back exit, avoiding the press entirely. Her security team guided her to a waiting car, and as she settled into the back seat, she finally allowed her carefully maintained composure to crack. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back, the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. Somewhere across the city, Meghan sat in her own car, staring out the window at the blur of New York traffic. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her team, but she turned face down. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about managing the narrative or controlling the message. She was just sitting with the silence, wondering if this was what rock bottom felt like, or if there were deeper places still to fall. 1 week later, Nina's documentary short dropped on YouTube at 3 a.m. with a simple title, "The Spotlight Isn't Free." By noon, it had 3 million views. The 15-minute film wasn't about taking sides. Instead, Nina had crafted something deeper. Interviews with young women from São Paulo to Seoul, all grappling with the same question. What does empowerment look like when the cameras stop rolling? "I watched 2 women destroy each other," said Maria, a 22-year-old activist from Mexico City. But maybe that's what we needed to see. Maybe we needed to understand that even our heroes are human. The documentary's most powerful moment came near the end, when Nina interviewed herself, speaking directly to the camera with the raw honesty of someone who'd witnessed something that changed her. "We wanted them to be perfect," she said. "We wanted Taylor to always be graceful and Meghan to always be right. But perfection isn't empowerment. It's performance. And maybe that's the real tragedy. We've created a world where women can't afford to be complicated." The cultural conversation began shifting. Think pieces emerged with titles like "The Empathy We Owe Our Icons" and "When Activism Becomes Theater." The hashtags evolved from hashtag Meghan versus Taylor to hashtag Complex Women and hashtag Human Not Hero. On a quiet Thursday morning, Taylor posted a single tweet. "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's wisdom. Thank you at Nina Ortega Films for reminding us that growth happens in the quiet moments." 2 days later, Meghan broke her social media silence with an Instagram post, a photo of a blank journal and fountain pen. The caption read simply, "Listening, learning, still here. The conversation continues." Oprah closed the summit season 3 months later with a quote projected behind her. "Sometimes fire clears the ground for something new to grow." The summit had ended in flames, but from those ashes, something honest had emerged. Nina's generation was asking different questions now, not about who was right, but about how to be real in a world that demanded perfection. The spotlight, they were learning, truly wasn't free. But maybe authenticity was worth the price. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.